on board. Identity Starfleet inactive.
Permission to come aboard, sir.
Granted, sir. Granted.
Why, it's Mr. Spock. Spock.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and I have joining me James. Say hi, James.
Hello, hello.
Well, today we have another different type of episode. We've had these types of episodes in the past, and it's not exactly the type of shows we kind of enjoy doing because of the reason we're doing them, but we do enjoy doing them because of gives us an excuse to kind of go over a body of work of a certain individual. It's happened to us in the past with Ralph McQuarrie and Glenn Larson, and today we are going over the body of work of Leonard Nimoy. Recently, we found out the sad news that he passed away. He had been sick for a while, and we wanted to spend some time because a number of our contributors, including James, and on the following episode, Steve Avona, are going to share some of their memories of how they first got introduced to this actor. You know, most of us seem to have this common thread that then kind of spreads out, and this happens to a lot of the artists that we know, whether it's a director or an actor or even a musician, a composer. You know, all of a sudden you discover some of their work here, and then it kind of like spider webs out into, you start to find out, oh, he was also this, and he also did that. And Leonard Nimoy is one of these actors that, I don't know about you, James, but for me, the first time I ever even saw anything having to do with Nimoy is obviously Star Trek. How about you?
Yeah, Star Trek is certainly where I got to know him, and you know, when we watch TV shows and movies like we do so much, these guys become part of us, part of our families. And sometimes that's a weird thing because, you know, they're not. They're doing a job and they're just trying to entertain us. But for so many years, he really has been part of my life. I am still buying Star Trek ships when they make them, and sometimes characters. And like we just did on a couple episodes ago, they're making new action figures of him. They're with us. They're our little tokens, our little totems that we carry with us. And I'm not really an emotional person, but when I found out a couple days before he passed that he had been taken to the hospital, and right away I had a vibe that this could be it. For some reason, I had not been following his tweets and stuff where he had basically, I think, understood he was coming to the end of his life because it was starting to get rough for him. But I sent some late night text out to some people once I saw that they had hurried him to the hospital. And I said, I think we might lose Leonard Nimoy soon. And it might have even been to you. I don't recall. And then a day or two went by and I said, well, maybe I was wrong and I hope I was. And he'll get back and he'll be young and spry again for the 50th anniversary. But sadly, the news came that he did pass away from COPD, which is kind of tough. And sadly, that's something that's exacerbated by smoking. And he said, I smoked, you shouldn't, basically. And he even admitted that, you know, it was something that he brought upon himself, sadly. There's nothing you can do at that point.
He apparently, from what I read, some of the articles, he had already quit smoking 20 or 30 years ago. But again, the damage was so much that about a year ago, I think is when he kind of knew for sure that, you know, things were coming to an end rather fast.
And it's heartbreaking that somebody that, I mean, smoking is pretty well known to be bad. And I'd say from the late 60s, early 70s, it was pretty darn obvious. But, you know, he was not a young man and people smoked. People smoked all the time. There's pictures of him in his Spock outfit with a cigarette in his hand, I think, once or twice I saw. And it's like, it's hard to believe that that's what did him in. You know what I mean? You live this long life, but it's still something so terrible. So.
Right. He was 83 years old when he passed. But like we mentioned earlier, he had a very diverse life in terms of he wasn't just an actor. He directed films. Later in his life, he even became a professional photographer. He was doing these art photography type of jobs, voiceover work, television. You know, he came back to television later on. But again, like we mentioned earlier, it all started with Star Trek.
Yeah, he started in the early 50s, but he was in the very first Star Trek pilot. He was a part of every Star Trek. So for people like us, this is somebody, every time a new Star Trek came out, we wanted to see him. And even when he wasn't the focus, as in Next Generation, for instance, he even appeared on Next Generation in those later years. So he became known for being the guy who was always part of Star Trek. And, made me very sad. I don't get very sad over, celebrities, even family members that I can't really control, what's happening to them. But I had to stop for a minute and I had to think about it because it was an important part of my life. Star Trek was on every Saturday night. My mother, my brother, and I, we would watch it waiting for my dad to come home at 6:00 on Channel 11 in New York. And, and then after that, anything he was in, that's like, oh, that's Spock. We got to watch it,
I think one of the more important things about his portrayal of Spock was the fact that he could really hold his own against the powerhouse that was Shatner in terms of, no matter how, a lot of people make fun of Shatner now and how much overacting he did and he still does and everything. But you got to remember that for the show, Shatner was a huge, huge personality that could easily overpower everybody because he was such a big personality. But in a completely different manner, Nimoy held his own, and sometimes you could actually say he kind of stole the show. He sometimes would become such an important character and would kind of, he wasn't like a second banana. He was kind of like a co-star, the true meaning of a co-star, just like in a certain way DeForest Kelley was. You have you have the lead actor, and then you have these secondary B and your C characters.
If Shatner was the head, they were the arms and the legs of the body of Star Trek.
Right, but I think they somehow managed, especially Nimoy, to push his way to the top also, where sometimes he seemed like the leading person in the episode, even though Shatner, everybody understood, Kirk is the captain, he's in charge of everything, but he was that good.
What's interesting is Shatner was the emotion of Star Trek, but Leonard Nimoy playing a supposed character who's controlled his emotions. I love the line at the end when sadly Spock dies of the Wrath of Khan, and of all the souls I've encountered, his was the most human, and he was the humanity as much as Shatner was the emotion, and DeForest Kelley's bones was maybe the brains or kind of emotional as well. I think Shatner was more of the strength, Kelley was the emotion, and Spock was the heart. This guy, even when he was angry, or he had to subdue it, but I'm sure I'm babbling a little bit.
Well, because he was half human, remember that.
But no, what I'm saying is, as an actor, he's got to play this character kind of straight, but yet there's a lot of episodes. I've recently rewatched all the episodes, and there's a lot of episodes where Bones is yelling at him because he's not doing enough to find the captain, or some other guy is giving him hell because he's gonna be charged with, treason or mutiny or something like that if he does anything to take back the ship. And Spock is just, Spock is the guy, the machine is running and he's gonna take care of it. And even as far as most recent, The Undiscovered Country, when Bones and Kirk are on the planet and Spock's got it under control, and it's like, okay, here we go, let's do it,
Well, what's cool, as you mentioned earlier, is that he was able to take this character and kind of continue with it through its different incarnations. You mentioned the animated show, Next Generation, and even beyond that, he's made so many appearances all the way up to the last two J.J. Abrams films where he played himself exactly, which it's a weird point of contention with a lot of people because of the fact that, in a way, the new movies are kind of an alternate universe, but he is allowed to play his own character. He is not an alternate Spock. He is the same Spock we always known because he is the only constant in this realm.
And I had no problem with the first JJ movie and how they used Spock and, the voiceover explaining what happened to him and where it was and how the timeline and everything like that. That was fine. It was an important part of the movie, and it probably was smarter and better than trying to work William Shatner in, which is a lot of people were complaining about. The second movie, when I saw it, I didn't even love the movie to begin with. And then when I saw that, I'm like, oh, they tack this on. They did this. This kind of ruined the last role, how we felt like we got a final Spock appearance. And then they tacked it on. But you know what? I'm glad they did it now in hindsight because he may have even known how much his illness had been affecting him, and knowing he was not going to be around. JJ may have also known from discussions they had, and it could have been a very nice gift to Nimoy and to us to have him in there one more time.
Yeah, I know. Now, the thing is that obviously, just like most other actors, like it or not, he will always, through the remainder of his life and his career, he was always being identified as Spock. That was his overwhelming character.
Yeah, he was so frustrated, kind of frustrated, let's say, that he put out an album, I'm Not Spock. There were these impressions that he did not want to be that character anymore. He actually wasn't going to participate in Star Trek Phase 2, the series after the original and the animated series that got turned into the motion picture.
Yeah.
And then they got him for that, and everybody's on board, and it's very exciting. And he kind of around that time probably realized, yeah, I am Spock, and eventually put out an album that said, I am Spock.
Yeah,
and
you might as well embrace it.
Totally embraced it. Never, disrespected fans for being fans, and, hung out. He went to conventions. He did everything.
Right.
We're all very lucky.
From what I understand, he was a different type of personality from the fan experiences, and I'm sure you'll hear a lot of this when we listen to Steve.
Yeah.
In terms of Shatner is a different type of star, and he behaves a different manner. And Nimoy, it was in a way almost completely the opposite in terms of how he related to the fans. Now, keep in mind also that, again, as an actor wants to kind of peel himself away from the Spock character, one of the following things that he was able to do after Star Trek, the initial television series, was Mission Impossible, which is a pretty well-known show with its own set of stars playing a completely, different character.
And when Martin Landau left, it was right when Star Trek was ending. And it was perfect timing. And they put him in the cast. And he's at least known as, maybe the third or fourth best known name from that show behind Landau and Peter Graves,
Yeah. And that show lasted for quite a number of years from what I remember.
Yeah, I think it was at least 5 years that lasted. I know he was on it for at least 3.
Right.
And, they're good episodes. That's something we should talk about more, because as long ago as it was, they're really good, thoughtful episodes. It's not just some slapped together show.
No, you're right. And also, like we mentioned earlier, that, he did have a career before Star Trek. He, in the 50s, he did a lot of 50s, typical television shows, and even early 60s television shows. But in the 70s, I remember even seeing him, I think, in an episode of Columbo, where just about everybody ended up in Columbo at one point or another.
Yeah, a lot of these shows, you were either on your way up or maybe on your way down, and you'd appear on the gauntlet of different shows until you got another show yourself, or, you kind of faded away. But, he never faded away.
He also bounced, I believe you mentioned earlier when we were talking, that he bounced around Broadway. He did a lot of stage work.
I remember him playing Vincent, which was Vincent Van Gogh. I specifically remember commercials, radio commercials for Equus, and it's like, yeah, Leonard Nimoy, I should go. It's Spock, but, it wasn't that easy to get to Broadway, even though we went to the city from time to time. I remember he played, it was kind of like a Channel 11 movie, a miniseries, when miniseries started coming.
Was it Golda?
A woman called Golda, exactly.
And apparently he was nominated.
He played her husband.
Right, he was nominated for an Emmy, I think. I don't know if he won. I don't think he won, but he was nominated. It was kind of a big deal for the time.
It was a fantastic movie, and him being in it was very, because he was of Jewish descent. The whole thing made it better for me. It was a historical piece. There's Ingrid Bergman's Golda, so that's a big deal. And Leonard Nimoy now is in it, playing an important role. So that made it better for me watching it as, while I was a little bit younger. It was right around the same time as Wrath of Khan. So he was out there, it's not like he was hiding away or anything. Right.
He also did, we mentioned about, all these nowadays be considered kind of weird albums. Like Shatner did a ton of them too, and so did Nimoy. And he also did a lot of voiceover work. He he was able to do some cartoons, some animated films. I think a Transformer film or something. The animated version. So he kept busy, but he kept bouncing a lot.
I knew of these albums because everybody knows the Shatner album, Mr. Tambourine Man, and Lucy in the Sky, but you don't expect that. Nimoy is a little more, civilized. No, he did a couple of those albums too. I think everybody had a hand in those kind of albums. Dr. Kildare sings, everybody. So there's one song that's gotten, a cult standing now about Bilbo Baggins. Before any of the Lord of the Rings or Hobbit movies, before the Hobbit cartoon, he's singing about Bilbo Baggins. And to this day, I'm still not sure if it's a goof or if it's serious. I don't know.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about his directing, because as one of the perks, I guess, or conditions for him to continue with the Star Trek films, he at some point was either offered or demanded, I don't know exactly what happened, the opportunity to direct. And that's how he got involved with Star Trek 3.
Well, he kind of wanted to be done with Star Trek after Star Trek 2. He said, it's like what we hear about Harrison Ford wanting Han Solo to die after Return of the Jedi, and Lucas said, no, it's not going to happen. He said, look, I did the movie, the motion picture, I'm doing this Wrath of Khan, it's big, but I think this is the perfect opportunity for, you have drama, and I can bow out like I want to. And it was a huge success. So what happens, Star Trek 3, this is what we want to do. This is what how we want to do it. And he was, I don't really think that's for me. I did my goodbye, and they offered him to be a director of it. He took the opportunity. I don't know if that's something he really wanted to be. I don't think he did. And it was great. I know a lot of people have issues with different off movies and stuff. I like the ones most people have problems with. There's something good in all of them for me. So he basically didn't really think he was going to be a director, but took the opportunity and did Star Trek 3. I like it. And then, of course, it was successful, so he did Star Trek 4.
Right.
But the biggest surprise was, after that, he did a non-science fiction, non-Star Trek, non-anything that you would expect, 3 Men and a Baby. And it turned out to be huge. And he was considered one of the most successful directors of the 80s because of that and the other 2 Star Trek movies.
Well, especially because back-to-back with Star Trek 4, Voyage Home, that was a huge critical and financial success.
Sure. 2 years in a row, he made 2 great movies, and then throw Star Trek 3 in there, which did pretty well on its own. So, he's a director now.
Right. In a way, it's kind of weird because he kind of had those hits, and then he kind of seemed to kind of move away from directing a little more. And it's almost like he keeps trying new things and then going away from them and coming back and forth. The only other item I would like to add to the list was on television. Also, I think it was from the 70s, around that time, that post Star Trek time, was when he was hosting In Search Of, which was a weird...
And that was fantastic. That was a great
bizarre show, wasn't it?
It basically did all these things, like In Search Of, it could be In Search of anything, In Search of Bigfoot, In Search of, Noah's Ark, In Search of the
pyramids.
Who's the pilot who the woman? What's her name?
Amelia Earhart.
In Search of Amelia. I mean, there was any subject possible. The Nazca lines, UFO sightings, whatever. And you're watching this, and this is like, oh, it's Leonard Nimoy from Star Trek, but this is serious stuff. This is historical. He's essentially the narrator and the guide through the episode. But that was a big deal. I mean, I would like to actually watch a lot of those again. I have to be in search of the old tapes.
Yeah, I even remember, and I think I saw it on YouTube. I don't think it was In Search Of, but it was definitely either a 70s or 80s type of television show where he was actually talking about Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back or Jedi. One of the Star Wars films, he was kind of like narrating like the making of, but it was a very smaller version of the making of Star Wars. So again, it's one of these little shows that probably only last half a season, but he did like I said, he did a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, there was a remake of Body Snatchers, and
that's right.
He played on that. Now, I didn't see that in the theater. I knew it existed.
Donald Sutherland, I think, was the lead.
Yeah, but I mean, that was a pretty big movie, and there he is in that. And so, anyway, I mean, he was a very good career. Stuff that we like, stuff that we probably missed because he was just out there, like you said.
But he also had an acting resurgence, if you will, I guess, later in his life, where I guess it might have been through the J.J. Abrams connection. He put him on a couple of episodes of Fringe a number of years back. And I know because I used to watch the show, I used to love the show. He played a very important, really good character in that show that all of a sudden brought him back to the genre, world.
I remember people, I have still never watched an episode of Fringe, but I know a lot of people who said it was great. It was fantastic that he was in it. It was important to the show. It should have kept going. Maybe another season. He could have done a lot more.
He was a very important character to the mythology of that particular show. And I think he also, even more recently, even did one Big Bang Theory appearance as himself, which was great. All these actors, sci-fi horror actors come back and participate in all these shows, which is great.
It's nice when you can stay long enough that you're so secure in what you've done that you can make fun of it. I think he did Priceline even when Shatner was doing all those goofy things.
He did a whole bunch of commercials and there were goofs and he was having fun and it was part of the thing. He even did like a music video for, it might have been Bruno Mars, I'm not entirely sure, but he was always goofing on himself in a different way that Shatner does. Shatner does something like that too, but in a different style. Nimoy always seems to do it, have fun, but never took himself that serious like Shatner does.
And you know what? You know what people forget? One of the earlier seasons, I don't know, season 4-ish or 5-ish or something of The Simpsons, he does...
That's right.
He does an appearance on the monorail episode, which, first of all, the monorail episode is probably in the top 10 of all Simpsons episodes, and there's a lot of Simpsons episodes. And it's the one with monorail. What's it called? Monorail. And everybody's doing this whole thing about the monorail that comes to Springfield that is probably going to crash. So he appears on it. And ironically, Conan O'Brien wrote that and wanted Takei.
Oh my God.
And Takei said no, he didn't want it. It was insulting. He thought it made bad commentary about the use of monorails and things like that. And it's like, what? So they asked Nimoy, because he was friends with like somebody from the show. He's like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. It sounds great. We'll have a good time. And it turned out to be one of the best episodes ever. And so I think he had a good sense of humor too.
Definitely. Like I mentioned, him and Shatner were the top dogs there. And now, we've already had, as far as the Star Trek crew goes, a number of them passed already. Scotty was probably the first one. Yeah. Then you had DeForest Kelley.
It's not new to Star Trek fans losing beloved cast members, right, but this is a big one. And what bothers me? I think I told you this. It's like 2016 is the 50th anniversary of Star Trek officially. And I'm sure there's going to be a huge outpouring of, retrospectives and things. And it's too bad we lost him now, because he would be a big part of it, even if it was just to talk about it more.
But he was involved until the last minute. The man was always going on conventions. He was always touring. He was always, willing to, he wasn't dismissing Star Trek. He always had time for Star Trek. He kind of, I guess, came around like most of these guys. Sooner or later, they have to figure out that this is part of their lives and they might as well enjoy it because it makes them money. It makes other people happy. And it's something they can be proud of. And he was, again, I would probably say, probably the best ambassador of the brand in terms of how comfortable he was with it, after a while. I don't even think Shatner will ever be that comfortable the way that Nimoy was.
And sadly, when Shatner goes, he's had just as good a career, but more people will probably focus on his goofy times and silliness. And I mean, there just weren't as many goofy and silly times for Leonard Nimoy, but he could be a silly guy too.
Oh, but definitely.
And I didn't follow him on Twitter. I don't know if Twitter was something you followed him on, but one of the last things he posted was apparently one of his poems, which he had done a lot. Somebody sent it to me today, and I thought about it, and it's really special for everybody, and it makes sense. A life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but not preserved, except in memory. And then he ended his tweets with LLAP, live long and prosper. But it's true. Your life, you have a lot of good times. You have a lot of bad times, but, you just keep the memories and, that's what we have. I mean, he's very special to me, and I'm glad that he did what he did and we were able to be a part of it.
Well, we're going to post a number of clips of all the different things we've talked about today. And if you guys enjoy this episode, next week we will follow up with it from another different perspective of our contributors. Like I mentioned before, Steve Ivona will tell us about some of the appearances that he was able to participate.
Personal interaction.
Yeah, he was actually able to go there and meet him in person. And I know that just like James was saying, sooner or later these guys are going to die because they're old. I mean, this man was 83 years old, but still, it doesn't diminish the fact that, it hurts when somebody that beloved from a show that you really enjoy so much for so many years passes. And we will give you more of that next week with even more clips and more stories. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you, James, for participating in today's show. And we will see you next week here at GeekFest Rants. Goodbye, everybody.
We are assembled here today to pay final respects to our honored dead. And yet it should be noted that in the midst of our sorrow, this death takes place in the shadow of new life, the sunrise of a new world, a world that our beloved comrade gave his life to protect and nourish. He did not feel this sacrifice a vain or empty one, and we will not debate his profound wisdom at these proceedings. Of my friend, I can only say this. Of all the souls I have encountered in my travels, his was the most human. Others? Huh?
I have been and always shall be your friend.